Hey, hello and welcome to this really fun tutorial by Flomotion. Because today I'm going to show you how you can drive this car without any license. So just follow me into After Effects. So in here, as always, let's build this whole thing from scratch. So let me quickly tell you what we are going to do today, because it's not just that one effect that sells the shot later on, but we have to do a lot of steps to make this shot really look convincing. So just real quick, as you have also seen in my last tutorial where I showed you some behind the scenes from some of my professional commercial work, I'm doing the same thing here, because over the last decade or so I've worked on many film sets and I have done a lot of green screen car driving scenes. What you're seeing here is some behind the scenes shots of the set of the film Taxi, which was starring Peter Dinklage, so you can see how everything was done in a professional way, and you can also see the before and afters, and you see what kind of details you need to create those kinds of shots. And this is really important because we want to do the same thing, but of course with a lower budget. Therefore we want to create a foreground. Then we want to create a background. Of course we need to create reflections and also a dirt layer. And as a last step we want to add some details. For example, we want to reduce the original reflections that are on the car finish already. And I'm also going to show you a cool way of creating this car wiggle so that it's bouncing on the street. So now let's start creating the foreground, so the green screen scene. And here is a really important thing that you always need to be aware of. So this is actually a small scene from a behind the scenes clip where we shot for HBO in Romania. The message is really important. Today we are shooting the big car crash scene in front of the green screen, as you see. My job for that is basically to be here to look that the shot later on looks like it has been shot for real. So therefore I shot this foreground. Let me just bring it out here onto the new compositions icon and call it our main comp and hit OK. And as you can see, this is the shot that I used later on, and you see that it's filmed pretty static from a tripod. You can see a little bit of movement over here, but this is just me sitting in the car and the car bouncing a little bit. What you can also see is that I just had a green screen that fits on those parts and not in the back window, but that's totally fine because we only need a green screen where we need it, and that means we only need it where something is happening. And I wanted to make sure that the green screen is in front of my face, of course, but also on the front shield, because we have a lot of reflections in here. And this is one advice that I learned during all my shots on set, that it's always best to bring the windows all the way down between the camera and the subject, in this case me, and have the windows up between the subject and the green screen. And the only reason why I also brought down the window between me and the green screen in the back is that we had so much sunshine and sunlight that the green was too much washed out. So this was just to get the key a bit better. But let me tell you something, if you're having like nighttime scenes, and for those shots for Taxi, like 80% of the shots were nighttime, you really need the reflections in that window to sell the shot. So no windows between camera and the actor, but windows between actor and green screen. Perfect. Another thing that I have tested, we just pre-compose those, and let me bring out the other footage, and as you see it, it's called 400 ISO shaky or shake footage, because that was one of the takes where I tried out if it looks better if the car is shaking. And you can see here how we did that, and in the end we didn't use that shot. Maybe that would look a little bit more realistic in the end, but I decided not to do it because then we would have to go into tracking the window over here, and also the roto would be a little bit more advanced on the windows. But if this would be a professional shot, I would recommend to do that on set to give it that extra detail level. But also this shot I tried to shoot with 400 ISO, and the other one with 100 ISO. And if you don't know what that means, this basically means the higher the ISO, the more sensitive your camera reacts to light. So the higher you push your ISO, the brighter the image gets, but also the more grain it gets. And this is super important because the more grain you get, the harder it will get to key the shot. So if I turn that on and off, you won't see that much of a difference. But if I go close to maybe over here, because this is kind of still, you can see the difference. No grain, a lot of grain. No grain, a lot of grain. And this is just cranked up to 400. So I would always recommend to try to shoot with the lowest ISO settings possible when shooting green screen, of course. So let's just delete the 400 ISO shaky clip and concentrate on this one. So now you have seen how we have created the foreground, meaning the shooting of the foreground. Now let's key out the foreground. So I just bring out the key light effect, drag and drop it onto the footage, and just click on a green color that is somehow close to my body, because that's the color that we want to get rid of the most. And by default this looks already pretty good, but we can tweak it. Normally you would go into the screen mat and just play with the clip black and clip white, and you could definitely do that, but let's just bring it back to 100. I just look at the alpha channel, and you can see that by hitting Alt +4 at the same time, or you can go down here where you have your colors and go to the alpha channel. And now I click on the green color that I picked and just drag and slide it until I find something that I think looks convincing. And what I'm looking for at the moment is I want to have lots of reflections in the windshield, but I want to have a soft edge around my hair. Okay, something like this looks fine to me. And another thing that I'm doing right now is I don't want to see the final result, but the intermediate result. That means we still have the green tone in it. So this is with the green tone. Let me take a screen grab here. And this is the final result. And you can see that we just get a little bit more detail when we don't let key light do the spill correction. So let's go back to the intermediate result and take care of the green tones later. So now let's create some masks for the back windows. Just hit the G button and mask out everything. And now I'm setting all of those to subtract. And of course you can take more time on doing that. Let's check our transparency by clicking on this button here. And you see this is really looking nice, and I don't even care too much about the semi-transparent parts in here, because later on when we put like reflections over it and the moving background behind it, this will look as if the light will hit and that there's something going on there, which will also make it look more convincing. Now we have created our foreground. Now let's take a look at the background. So I have a background over here that I have shot. By the way, I have shot the foreground as well as the background with the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera 4K. And if you want to learn more about my equipment and what I used, and for example the green screen that I used for that shot, I've listed all of this down in the description below. Also like my hardware, my recording software for these tutorials and all that stuff. So just check that out in the description below. What I've done here, I sat on the back seat of the car, had the windows of course open, and just filmed this one handheld. Because what I found is that it's better to shoot those plays handheld if you can. Depending on the car is shaking a lot and it does those micro shakes. Even if you just turn on the engine of your car and have a camera mounted to the hood, it will also start shaking on a really high frequency. What I found, it's best to have the camera handheld because your hand is compensating all those bounces, and even better would be on a gimbal. Of course, for a larger production you can't really do that, because I had shooting days where we were filming like 8 hours a day, just plates. But for shots like this, handheld is totally perfect, and this is what this looks like at the moment. So we definitely have to work on that a little bit, or in other words, we let After Effects do the work. Because I'll just click on the warp stabilizer effect. And by the way, you can also right click on your footage, go to track and stabilize and click on the warp stabilizer. And the warp stabilizer is really perfect for those kinds of shots. By default we have smooth motion and a smoothness of 50%, which is totally fine. You can also see the percentages and how long it takes. If you have a longer clip and you want to work while it's still analyzing, you can go down to the advanced settings, click on hide the warning banner, and then you can just continue working while you're actually analyzing and solving. But it's already stabilized and this was real time, so really fast. And let's check out the result. This is really cool. Let's just bring out a ruler by hitting Ctrl R, because I'm feeling that it is a little bit off the horizon line. So let's click on the clip, hit R for rotation, and just rotate it a little bit. So what I've prepared for this tutorial, I have just rendered out the stabilized version so that we can just work a little bit faster here, but it's the same shot. Okay, we have created our foreground, we have created our background. Now let's bring both of them together by just bringing in our BG. And let's play this back. Okay, we are getting somewhere. So how do we place our background? Where exactly does the horizon need to be? Well, we can easily find that out by defining the horizon. Let's just bring out a new layer, call it horizon. Disable it, hit G to get our pen tool, and then just draw lines around straight lines in our car. So this window line here, maybe around the radio, and maybe once more to the edge of that window, and the other edge should be somewhere here. And you see all the vanishing points, they meet in one point, and this is our horizon. Let's bring out a ruler again, and okay, almost right. Let's just bring this down a little bit, and I'm just doing this pretty rough. What you can also do is you can keyframe your background, and again I'm just doing this really rough so that our horizon stays about in the same position. Here we are. It doesn't really look nice because our background has way too much contrast. But how can we actually check that? Well, that's pretty easy because we have some reference material filmed already. You remember? This is our original footage. And you see, this is how bright the background is. So let's make a new layer, call it white, and just click on one of the white spots, and it's almost completely white. And I'll just bring this white layer up here, and let's do it once again. This time we call the layer the black layer, and click on one of the darkest parts here in the background. And isn't that just insane? This is our brightest and darkest part of the background. I bet you wouldn't have guessed that. So let's quickly click on both of the layers, right click them, and make them a guide layer. A guide layer doesn't render when you render it out. So you have it in the frame visible all the time, but it simply won't render. And I'm also going to lock this. Disable our reference, and now let's bring out a levels effect and bring it onto our background. And now we can play with this. Over here we have the brightest part, so let's just play with this until it's actually unlock those, and bring the white somewhere around here and the black somewhere around here, or maybe even better here in the front where we really have black values. And back in the levels effect, the white is looking pretty good and the black is obviously way too dark. And what helps for that is if you create a new adjustment layer and just make everything black and white. Okay, you see something like this. This is our black layer and this is our background. So somewhere around here looks fine. Uncheck it. Now you see we still have to bring some red into our background blacks. So going to the red. Okay, now I'm hiding my guide layers here, and let's have a look. With, without, with, without. Pretty good. We just overdid that a little bit. And now what I've done, once I made it correct, and now I make it look up to what I wanna have in the shot. So this is what we have now. let's just quickly get rid of the green tones in the foreground, and we can do that by hue and saturation. Go to greens and just drag them down. A small detail, but as I told you, all the details will make up the final shot. So next thing that I want to do is I want to duplicate the foreground because I want to have more reflections, and basically I create a second key for more details. Call this the window and bring it beneath everything. Reset the key light and make another version of it to just have more reflections. And I can really overdo it here. You see, hit OK. And now I'm just going to mask out that front shield. You see, this is with and without the window. Way better now. Next thing that we have to do is we need to bring some texture back to our windows, because the only window that we can see at the moment is the front window. Let me just quickly tell you how we do that. I have a dirt texture here, and that is a semi-transparent texture with some dirt and some, I don't know, raindrops and smeary stuff. And I'll just show you how we bring that into our shot, and afterwards I'm going to show you how I created this. Okay, super easy. Take our dirt texture and bring it behind the window. Now we just mask out that window here, bring it down again, and do the same for the back windows. Now let's concentrate on that window over here, and we just want to change the blending mode so that it looks more convincing, maybe to something like add. So this is with and without, and you can play with the transparency now. With and without. Now you really feel that there's something going on, because there is actually something going on. For the other dirt texture, let's just try another blending mode if something else would work better, and I would always recommend you try out as many as possible and then choose the one that works best for you. Maybe overlay is the one that's working for you. That works pretty good over here, so maybe let's just try that also for our front texture. Overlay, also a pretty interesting look. This is with and without windows. Okay, perfect. We have two more windows in the front, so let's just bring this one out once again, bring it above everything, solo it, and now I'm just creating a mask for the window, because later on I'm using that also for our reflections. So let's create a new layer and call it matte. Hide it for now. Create a shape where our window should be and feather it a little bit. Okay, so this is the matte for our window. Let's also create a back window. Also feather this 5 pixels. And now let's enable our dirt texture again and use the matte as an alpha matte. So you can just go to the track tab over here and select the alpha matte from the layer matte. Now we have dirt textures just on the windows. Again, we go to the overlay setting, which we found looks nicest. I'm also going down with the transparency here. But I also promised you to show you how I created that dirt map. So just quick and dirty. We make a new composition, call it our dirt, hit OK, create a new layer, make it black for now, but the color doesn't really matter, and apply a fractal noise to it. And I'm just going to scale this up, and I'm just going to bring down the opacity a little bit. So this is the overall variation within the dirt. So I'm just duplicating that, and beneath I want to bring out this smear effect. So let's reset it and set it to, you guessed it, smeary. And let's also scale this up. Now we enable the other version again, set it to something like multiply. Then I created once more a black layer, went to the pen tool and just created some dots, feathered all of them a little bit, and as a last step I created a white solid and just went to the rectangle tool, created like lines, and then I went to the ellipse tool and I blurred it and also went down with the transparency a lot. And again, this is already semi-transparent, so when you bring that on top of something, it will already look really cool. At the end you have something really unique. Okay, back in our main comp. Let's add the reflections, and the reflections I simply used my stabilized background again, and now I just scaled it up a lot, repositioned it and set it to screen, and bring down the opacity. Now you can see that the highlight or the brighter parts really blend over my face, and for a normal reflection the brighter parts blend over, but the darker parts you could basically see through. So let's just try to create that by just keying out the darker parts of this reflection. So I'm going for the extract tool, which seems to be a tool that I use pretty often, and then I'm just dragging away the black parts, just like so, and then I'm feathering this. Now you can see what this is doing when I disable and enable it. Wherever there was darker parts going over the reflection, I can now really see through. Bring out the matte again by simply duplicating it and again using it as an alpha matte. So now you see the reflections are only in the window. So really looking nice. Two more things that we can do here. For our background, let's just blur this a little bit because it's in the distance. So I bring out the camera lens blur, and by default this already blurs it by 5%. Do the same for our reflections here. Now we're already at the end of this tutorial, but I told you we need to work a little bit more on the details. And one thing that hopefully you already noticed is that there are some distracting reflections in the paint of the car. So let's work on those, and therefore I'm duplicating my footage and I bring it to the top and quickly solo this. Get rid of all the masks that I had done here and mask out that part. And now what we can do is simply blur away the reflection with a directional blur, for example. And we want to blur it like really a lot. Okay, now the reflections are gone, but they are blurring above our matte. So let's simply duplicate it again and use that as the matte. And of course for the matte we want to get rid of the blur. Perfect. But now also we have worked on the color, and that seems to be fine for now. Maybe also add a Gaussian blur to it to hide the streaks that we have created now with the directional blur. Okay, but now the problem is that the black line in between here also is blurred directional and in all directions via the Gaussian blur. So let's bring it up once more, duplicate it to the top. Let's solo this, and we don't want to have the directional blur and we don't want to have the Gaussian blur. Now we only want to have the black part, and yes, again we are using the extract effect. And now we want to get rid of everything but the black line. But it still looks a little bit fake, even though the reflections are gone. But there should be reflections actually. Actually there should be the same reflections like in the window, just a little bit different with a little offset, because the reflections are not hitting glass but they are hitting paint. So hey, why not do that? We have the matte already, so let's bring it up and get our background stabilized up again and use it as a matte. So this is what we have now. And as I told you, if we just offset this a little bit, maybe bring down the opacity, just give it some variation. So this is really looking nice. Two more things that we need to do. At first, I want to add a glow to all of this, and this will make sense in just a few seconds. And then we work on the camera movement as well as the wiggle for the shot, and I'm going to show you a really handy trick for the wiggle. But at first let's create a glow on top of everything and just apply stylized glow, and I'm also calling this glow. And now for the threshold, I'll just tweak it until only the brightest parts glow. So this is the sky basically. And now I'm just going to increase the radius. We'll make it look strange at the beginning, but as we go further until like 400, it fills everything, but it's just too much. So we just bring it down, maybe just 0.2. So just that you can see it, this is what this is doing, and this will give it an interactive light. I hope you got the idea. So what I'm going to do now, I could either pre-compose all of this, or I'm just using our main comp and dragging that onto a new composition and go to half resolution for the composition as well as the playback. And now I hit S, set a keyframe, hit P, set a keyframe. So this is scale and position. Hit U to reveal both of the keyframes. Now I'm just scaling this up. So what I'm thinking at the moment, how could that shot have been filmed? So The only way this is doable is to film it from another car or from some other vehicle basically. So that means that this car is next to the car that I'm driving. So what I'm going to do is basically offset this horizontally a little bit, because the car wouldn't always hold up to my speed, and maybe it has this standard scaling, but at the end it's just zooming in on me a little bit. So this is already looking pretty nice. And as the final and last step, as I told you, I'm going to show you how you can create a realistic wiggle. So let's bring up a null object, and in that null object we want to store our wiggle data. And I'm also going to create a new solid and maybe just make this 200 by 200 pixels and make it red so you can see it. And I'll just parent this to the null. So now, a wiggle. What is a wiggle? A wiggle is an easy expression that lets you wiggle properties. So that will make more sense in just a few seconds. When you click on the stopwatch here while holding down the Alt button, you can type in expressions. And this has a cool autofill function. So when I'm typing in wiggle, it'll already have it here. And when I hit enter, I'm already in between those brackets. And now I just have to define how much I want this to wiggle. So at first, I'm telling you how often this should happen. And this is per second. So once a second maybe. And how much should it wiggle? Let's just do it a lot so you can see it, like 50 pixels. So I'm just showing you the red square now. So once a second, it goes about 50 pixels horizontally and vertically. And it does it in a really fluid and organic way. Okay, so but what do we want to have for our car? We want to have the movement way faster, because it's driving and the road isn't that even, so it's really wiggling a lot. So let's increase the number 16 times a second. Okay, this could be about right, but the wiggle would just happen in an up and down position, because it wouldn't wiggle all the way around, because when the car is driving on a slightly uneven road, it bounces up and down in a really high frequency. So how can we do that? Because we want to have it just on the up and down, so the Y position. And this is really super easy. So let's just cut out that expression so we can paste it in later, and we only want to have one of those two positions. How can we separate those positions? And there's a really easy trick. Just click on the graph editor, click on the position, and there you have this button that just separates the dimensions. Boom! Now you have X and Y. So we can get rid of the graph editor, click on the Y position while holding down the Alt button, and paste in our expression. Now you see it's bouncing up and down, but it's just too much. But the frequency seems to be good. Yes, that could be a really good amount. So let's hide the red square and parent our main comp to the null. Also, let's add motion blur, and you know what, for the sake of it, let's create an adjustment layer, call it crop. For the effects and presets, we type in crop, bring it out, and use a standard of 10% cropping, and now we have a really nice cinematic look. And hey, this is already the end of this tutorial, and if you liked what you've seen and if you learned some tips and tricks here and there, just feel free to click on the subscribe button for my channel, because in that way I can do way more tutorials like this one, and I really enjoy doing those. And again, as I told you, you'll find links to all the equipment that I use down in the description below. And now I wish you a lot of fun driving without a license, but with green screen of course.